One of the absolute worst things you can do when you make a mistake is to make an excuse. And yet, as men, we constantly finding ourselves using excuses to defend ourselves, to defend our personal self-worth, to defend our competence, to defend our pride. And we, even though we know that these excuses aren't good, and we could be like, okay, yeah, I get it, we still find ourselves using them. Even like it kind of shocks us too. We just get so defensive and so insecure that we use these excuses. So in this video, I'm going to share with you, I think it's 4 excuses that we need to stop using as men. And hopefully by kind of pointing them out to you, we can navigate why we use them, so then we can better understand and navigate situations where we feel like we want to use them and know, okay, this isn't the right response here, and to actually get to true meaningful responses, to take responsibility for our actions, and that it also doesn't need to totally destroy our own personal sense of dignity and self-worth. It doesn't need to be as catastrophic as we might think it is. Okay, so the first excuse we need to stop using as men is I'm tired, or I was tired. Like, okay, you do something wrong or you say something out of turn, somebody in your life confronts you about it, and you say, oh, well, I was just super tired, right? And we think this is a reasonable justification because when people are tired, they tend to be weaker, right? Weaker mentally, weaker emotionally. And so then it makes sense that, oh, okay, of course you would say this thing that wasn't totally appropriate, or you would do this thing that didn't make sense because you were tired. The truth is that that's not a reasonable excuse. And the reason being is I think a lot of who we are comes out when we're tired. We like to think of it as this kind of like different person, maybe. Like you see, okay, I am who I am right now when I'm at my peak, and I'm this person. But I think we tend to see the character of somebody when they're not at their peak, when actually they're in stressful or high pressured situations, or they're tired. What is that person's temperament going to be? Are they going to lash out? Are they going to be, mean towards other people, or angry towards them, or prideful, or self-obsessed, or self-consumed, or selfish? Like, who is that person when you're tired? And so for me, even though this is kind of an easy excuse to use, I think, oh, I didn't get a good sleep last night, that's why I behaved in this way. We just shouldn't even say that. Like, why are we saying that? We're trying to explain these things away. That doesn't explain your mistake away. We should hold ourselves to a higher standard to not excuse the tired version of ourselves, but hold that person to the same standard that we hold ourselves to all the time, because that's when our character really shows, is in those high pressured or challenging, uncomfortable situations. The next excuse is I didn't know. So it's an appeal to ignorance. I didn't know. Somebody confronts you on something and you said something off, or you did something wrong, and you made a mistake, and you're like, well, I just didn't know. It's my bad. I wasn't trained, properly, or my parents didn't raise me in a way where I would know that. So the lack of experience or understanding doesn't excuse what you've said or what you've done. It doesn't change the consequence or the result of that mistake. Hey, yeah, okay, I get that you weren't trained in a particular way, or you weren't taught this, or you just didn't know this. That's okay. But like I was saying before, holding ourselves to a higher standard, not going to appeal to ignorance as if, oh, you know what, it's other people's fault, because that's really what we're doing. We're blaming other people for not telling us, because otherwise, who would we be blaming? Ourselves. It's like, if you didn't know it, then that's still your fault. But no, we're saying, oh, I didn't know that. And we're kind of saying that maybe you should have told me that, or somebody else should have told me that. And so we're kind of blaming it on them. And that gets into our next one. Our next excuse that we shouldn't be doing is you did this, or shifting the blame. You think about Adam in the garden, when Eve ate the fruit, and he blames God, basically. He blames Eve and God. He says, this woman that you've gave to me, she was the one who ate the fruit. Like, it wasn't me. I didn't do it. You gave this woman to me, and she ate the fruit. But what was he doing? He's neglecting his responsibility. God set Adam up as the spiritual leader of Eve, that he would be the leader in that relationship, and he didn't do it effectively, but he shifts blame here. So we need to be sure that we're not shifting blame onto other people, playing the victim mentality. I say all this, but at the same time, I'm terrible at this stuff. I really am. I am super, super sensitive when anybody tries to tell me anything about what I'm doing wrong or how I messed up or that kind of thing. And I could appeal to, oh, well, when I was younger, I was praised a lot and I did a lot of things for people, for my family, and they just told me all the time how awesome I was. And that was, and I just kind of, now I can't really take criticism because I didn't get a lot of criticism growing up, because I just thought I was doing everything perfectly, or that's what my aspiration was. And so now when I don't do things perfectly and somebody points it out, I get really defensive and I get really anxious and I get upset. And I could say that, but what good does that do? It doesn't do any good at all. And so what do I need to do now? Well, I need to say, okay, yeah, I'm sorry, right? Like, ask for forgiveness. That's where you need to go. If you've hurt somebody, if you've done something wrong, then find reconciliation and stop shifting the blame onto other things or into other people or casting blame, all that kind of thing. One of the biggest excuses that is tempting for me is I was triggered. So maybe you say something or you do something and you try to shift the blame by saying, okay, well, you did this and that made me feel this way, so I did this, right? And maybe you're just explaining, like, hey, if you're in a relationship and you're explaining these kind of challenging relational dynamics and in hopes to understand each other better, I get that. But if it's in an accusatory way, like, you said this thing to me and that hurt me, so I had to say this thing to you to hurt you back, right? Or you criticized this about me and that made me feel defensive, so I had to do this, or I had to say this. And it's this kind of like this belief that anytime we get triggered in any way, and what is a trigger? A trigger is basically a sensitivity or insecurity we have, or maybe something that we have been, a way that we've been hurt in our past that has created a little bit of a wound. So now anytime anybody, addresses that thing or talks about that thing in that way, or says that in regard to that topic about our lives or about who we are, we feel sensitive about it. And when we feel sensitive about it, what do we want to do? Well, we want to get them away from it. We want to push back on it. If you have a wound on your hand, right, and somebody tries to touch it, what are you going to do? You're going to try to push them off you. And that makes sense, right? But in this case, it's not an excuse. The more we can understand our own triggers, the more we can be ready to handle them when they come up, right? If you have a trigger that says maybe you're not a competent cook, okay? You're not a very competent cook, and you're cooking something and somebody says something just kind of like, oh, you should do it this way. And all of a sudden you're triggered because you're like, oh, well, I have this fear, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, that people don't see me as a competent cook and they don't see me as a competent person in that regard. And so this is kind of an attack on my value and my dignity as a man. And and you might be like, whoa, you're getting a little bit up there. Like, it shouldn't be that serious. Well, a lot of these triggers could be. I'd encourage you to look at your own life, see where you might be triggered in areas that you never thought you would be. And then somebody says, okay, so back to the scenario, somebody says, hey, you should do it this way. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I was triggered, so I need to say this thing. I need to lash out at you. I need to say this thing to correct or to push you away. And it's like, well, why? Well, because there is this insecurity and there's this wound there, and that wound needs to be healed. It really does. But we can't use that wound as an excuse to hurt other people or to lash out at other people or to be impatient with other people or to be unkind to them. You need to deal with your own stuff. Part of what it means to be a man is not letting your own baggage control your life and impact and dictate the way you interact with other people. If you are letting your baggage, your past wounds, be the determining factor in how you interact with other people, man, it's going to be so destructive. It's going to be so destructive. And maybe you've experienced that already. If every time you're triggered, you are forced to lash out at people, or if you're constantly complaining on outside circumstances, oh, I'm tired, oh, this happened to me, this is why I'm behaving this way. This is something that by no means am I perfect at. I'm growing a lot in this area, and I need to, because I'm not good at it. I struggle a lot with it. So I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments down below where you're at with all this stuff. If you want to join the Brotherhood, subscribe, because I'm putting out new videos every single week. And if you want to support what I'm doing, click on the Patreon link or the channel membership link. Either way, you can support what I'm doing. Until next time, keep pursuing the mission.